Hello. I'm going to tell you the story of Marion Ira Stout, also just known as Ira Stout. It's a Victorian story of murder, intrigue, and incest. Marion Ira Stout was the second person hung in Rochester. He was hung in October 22nd, 1858 for the murder of his brother-in-law, Charles Littles. It's a love triangle gone bad, and it's an incestuous love triangle at that, because Ira and his sister were supposedly having an affair, which made it what would have been the murder of the century in 1858. The newspapers wrote about it quite extensively. It attracted the attention of Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass, two of Rochester's more prominent citizens of the day. It begins earlier that year when Ira comes back to Rochester to live with his family. His family was from Pennsylvania, and they were a criminal family for the most part. They came from Pennsylvania and came to Rochester to make a new name for themselves. And Ira had to stay behind because he was still serving time in the Pennsylvania State Penitentiary, and his father was serving time in Auburn State Penitentiary for robbery and arson. Ira contends, and up until the day he died, that he was a good boy gone awry because of the failures of his family, and that he was an early example of social justice, and why people wanted people who didn't have a good chance in life to get a second chance. But Ira came to Rochester to move in with his family after serving time in Pennsylvania. He was a young man, good looking, well read, and wanted to turn his life around, as they say. And he comes back to Rochester and finds out that his sister is married to a lawyer of ill repute. He was a man named Charles Littles, who was known to carry a knife and spread venereal disease from his days in the saloon. His specialty was insurance claims, which kind of makes him an ambulance chaser of his day. Charles was not a good person, and at this time, people like Susan B. Anthony were very interested in what was the temperance movement. They didn't. People like Susan B. Anthony did not like people like Charles Littles, because he did just what I just described: go to the saloons and spend his paycheck and bring venereal disease home to his wife. And these are the kinds of things that really rubbed the suffragists like Susan B. Anthony the wrong way. So when Ira was eventually tried, Susan B. Anthony, he was a sympathetic figure to people like Susan B. Anthony and her protege, her contemporary, Frederick Douglass. So Ira comes back to Rochester, and he finds out that his family's living sort of between Monroe Street and Water Street and Exchange Street. His brother-in-law is not treating his sister very well, and he's not happy about this. He's trying to turn his life around, but his sister's being dealt a bad hand by her brother, and by her husband, Charles Littles. And so about that time, somebody fell off the Andrew Street Bridge and disappeared. And they thought his body had washed up to down the Genesee River and out to the Lake Ontario, never to be seen again. And this gave Ira an idea. He thought, well, I'll do the same. I'll kill Charles and throw him over the bridge, and out to the lake he'll go. So he tried to do that once, didn't work, and then he tried again. This time he brought his sister and got his sister involved, and they met him at what was called Falls Field. This would be this is High Falls Overlook Park today, which is over near the Genesee Brewery, over near the High Falls. So Ira invited Charles to the field to say that I've got your sister's going to meet her lover at this place tonight, and I think you should come with me to confront them. Little did Charles know that the lover in question was actually Ira himself, and they met there at the field, and Ira did just what he thought he would do. He bashed Charles with a iron mallet and threw him over the cliff and down into the gorge. And this is where the best laid plans went awry, and Charles only went down so far as to a ledge a few feet below and didn't get into the river. So Ira had to climb down and finish the job by pushing him over the ledge. And as he climbed down, he slipped on the mud and broke his arm. And he did manage to push Charles over the ledge and into the water, but he was in so much pain he passed out and fainted. When he finally woke up, he called his sister Sarah Littles to come help him get up. And then Sarah came down behind him and then fell down and broke her wrist in the process. So now it's starting to sound kind of like a Coen Brothers movie at this point. But they finally come around and they get up and they go home, leaving a trail of mud behind them. Well, the plan still didn't work out quite as they wanted. They were hoping that the body would wash out to Lake Ontario and never be seen again, but it really only went a few hundred yards down and down the river and got hung up in the brambles. And turns out the body that had fallen off the cliff sometime before and gave Charles this idea was the person was Jewish, and the Jewish community was very interested in finding this body because it was very important to them that this man be properly buried. So there was a search party out for the body of the first man looking, and they found the body of Charles Littles instead. And he was clearly murdered with the coroner's description describing a very gruesome scene of a man whose head had been bashed in, along with a pair of spectacles and some an item of ladies' clothing, sort of like a fur. Well, they followed the sheriff didn't have to work too hard. He got to the scene and followed the mud trail home back to Ira's house, and his family being a family of known criminals, not so well known that they were criminals at that time, but a little bit of research quickly revealed that they were, and they arrested the whole family. And then they brought them all down to the coroners, and they proceeded to question them. And one of the observations was that Sarah Littles, even though she was being questioned right beside her husband, who was being dissected as they spoke, didn't show much concern for the body of her husband being dissected in front of her. And it became clear that she was involved and Ira was involved, and he was arrested and tried for murder. And originally he was the murder trial was fast. He was within a week he was found guilty, but word got out that there might have been some that the jury had already reached their conclusion before the trial, and he managed to get a retrial. And then in the subsequent days, by this point, Ira was starting to become a bit of a local celebrity, especially among women in Rochester. He was a good-looking young man, well-read, and he was described as looking like an Indian. He had a long, sharp nose, and he kept his hair long and angular face, and women really took to him, and the women of Rochester really took to him, and he even tried to smuggle poison into the jail to help him die. He really was, and he became kind of a cause celeb for the budding social justice movement of Rochester, and Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass both appealed to the governor for that he would not be executed. Frederick Douglass was an opponent of the death penalty and actually gave a speech at Corinthian Hall about the injustice of the death penalty. It's considered one of Frederick Douglass's 10 best speeches. They brought in people from out of town to talk about the horrors of the death penalty, and this went on, but eventually it did not go well for Charles, and he was not. I'm sorry, I keep saying Charles. Did not go well for Ira, and he was eventually hung, and he was taken to the jail, and sadly, the hanging method in Rochester at that time in 1858 was what they called the pull-up method, which was different than what we see in the movies. If you watch any Western movies of hangings where the person falls through a trap door. In this scenario, Ira was pulled from the floor with a pulley, and according to the newspaper accounts of the day, he hung for many, many minutes before, and he thrashed about with under the hood. They put a hood over his head, and he thrashed about. And according to the papers, his struggles for 8 minutes were severe and caused the spectators to turn away. And after 8 minutes, he still had a pulse that was as full as in life. Eventually, after 30 minutes, they cut him down, and they determined that he was in fact dead, and they began the process to take him away. This still being a sensational murder, I guess the papers didn't want to give up on the story even after he died, and a rumor started spreading that Ira was still alive, and that somehow they had brought him back to life with galvanic batteries. This is 1858. This is the full-on Victorian movement. This is maybe 40 years after the publish of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein book. So it's easy to see why these sort of rumors might have some sort of hold. But eventually, it was concluded that Ira was dead, and he was buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in an unmarked grave, not far away from the Sibleys and the Watsons and some of Rochester's more prominent figures of the day. An unmarked grave in Section D. If you want to find the grave of Ira Stout, you look around in Section D. And about a year later, the papers wrote a follow-up story on his mother, who became kind of a ghost about town in her own way. She was nobody really wanted much to do with her anymore. She did laundry and housekeeping for people under assumed names. And, but despite everything, she did manage to find, to get the money to bury her son in the unmarked grave at Mount Hope Cemetery. But that's the story of Ira Stout. It was an early story of social justice. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't talk about the incest. In this coroner's inquiry, it was several witnesses were reported seeing Ira and his sister in the same bed at all hours of the night and early in the morning. So this again added some sensational fodder to the story. And like I said, it became a lover's triangle of a very strange sort in the Victorian era. But again, that's the story of Ira Stout, and I hope you enjoy it. And there's more to learn. It's a fascinating story, and I think if you Google it and go to the library, there's still more to be told about it. Thank you very much. Bye.